really happy to have you present towards the end of this wonderful project. Many of you will have met Ingela during her research visits, her many frequent research visits, and it's both a wonderful opportunity to hear the reflections on this project overall. I think one of the coolest titles I've seen for a long time, social interaction, cool costumes, and what a way to sell it all. So we're really looking forward to hearing you talk. So about 45 minutes. Would you prefer questions as you go or at the end?
I think at the end would be the best.
Okay.
If it's nothing urgent, of course.
Yes.
Something that's very unclear.
Great. So we will take some questions at the end. We'll take about 15 to 20 minutes of questions, and then we will have sandwiches as well. Yeah, thank you so much again.
Thank you so much, Christine. And thank you everyone for coming here today and sharing your valuable time with me. I'm going to summarize a really complex project that has been going on for 3 years and involves about 70 persons in various ways. So I hope it will make sense, and yeah, just please let me know after if there's anything that you want to know more about. So I've been a postdoc associate here at the Interacting Minds for 2 years now, but I'm also a senior lecturer in the study of religions at Dalarna University in Sweden. And I'm a very interdisciplinary researcher, which means that I cherry pick all the fun stuff that I find. So I'm working with cognitive theory and mainly qualitative methods. And my general interests are in social cognition, fantasy-based realities, informal learning, and autism anthropology. And for me, being an autism anthropologist means that I collaborate a lot with autistic people, and I learn about autism from autistic people. Today I will be going through the background to the project that I will present, and then the main focus will be on the empirical material, and I will share some photos with you and some quotes. And then a very brief framing of results in the end, where I'll be talking a bit about the role of playfulness and humor, embodied learning, and narrative scaffolding. So the problem is that we have an increasing rate of pupils who refuse to go to school. This happens in Sweden, but it also happens elsewhere. And it has been estimated that about 40 to 45% of Swedish pupils who have an autism diagnosis periodically refuse to go to school. And there may be several reasons for this. Autism is characterized by social difficulties, and school is a highly social area, which makes it challenging and exhausting if you have autism. And autistic pupils often also have special needs in terms of extra structure, extra guidance, and so on. And they don't always get that. In fact, they rarely get that. But also in special educational schools where there are autistic pupils and everything is adapted according to their needs, we see this school aversion. And we can also see traces of fear in their behaviors. You have the flight response in terms of school refusal. You have the fight response in terms of peer conflicts and classroom conflicts, and also quite some self-harm among young autistic individuals. And you have the freeze behavior, which means that you sit really quietly and passive in the classroom, and you only manage to do exactly what's in front of you, and you don't really engage with anyone else. These, of course, have serious consequences. To begin with, it has consequences for these pupils, because we know that education is really important for well-being in adulthood. We also see high rates of anxiety, self-harm, and even suicide among autistic individuals. But it also has serious consequences for parents. It's been estimated in one study that about 50% of all parents to autistic kids suffer from burnout, and this in turn has consequences for society at large in terms of burdens on psychiatry and also financial sort of burdens. So this is a problem that we really need to address and deal with. And we've known this for a couple of decades right now. Bryson, Rogers and von Bohm wrote in 2003 that there is a wide agreement that the social and emotional well-being of children with autism needs to receive more attention within the school system. That is, while academic learning is important, this goal should not supersede the children's need for social contact with others, for participation in recreational and other school-based activities, and for a sense of belonging and of being recognized and valued. So what they're saying is it's not only the school results, it's like how it feels going to school, that you feel valued and appreciated and that you develop friendships. So where do autistic individuals thrive? It turns out that many of them thrive in fantasy-based contexts. There's research on tabletop role-playing games, tulpamancy, furry fandom, massive multiplayer online role-playing games, cosplay, and live-action role-play. Autistic individuals seem to be overrepresented in all these areas. Actually, a colleague of mine who recently got his autism diagnosis, he told me that when you're at a LARP, a live-action role-play, you can throw a rock like this and you'll definitely hit an autistic person because there are so many of them. Heather Browning and Walter Veit, who are both autistic scholars, they comment on this attraction to nerd culture. Unlike the real world, it's possible for one to gain a complete knowledge and understanding of all the facets of an imaginary world. This is important because many autistic individuals, they experience their daily life as extremely fragmented and incoherent. But in narrative realms, you have the possibility to gain a sense of control and overview. Nissel and Woolley also found that these fantastic realms provide a safe place where vulnerable people can process difficult issues, which in turn promotes emotional and cognitive development. And research also shows that there's some social learning going on because you actually hang out with people and you socialize, and that's how you learn about social interaction. People develop friendship and they also get increased confidence in daily life. The first study in this project, which is now an article in peer review, is based on interviews with 10 experienced adult LARPers who all have an autism diagnosis. For me, there's a really interesting paradox in live action roleplay and autism. Because if you look at what live action roleplay is about, it's basically everything that autistic people usually hate. So you have social interaction in large groups with a lot of people that you don't know. It's based on surprises and improvisation, and it's also sensorially intense. What they told me was that they got attracted to LARPing through nerd culture. Most of them were already engaged in reading fantasy literature or playing online social games and so on. And as one participant said, when I realized that in LARPs you can basically be part of Lord of the Rings, then that was it for her. And when they join these communities, they develop long-term friendships, and that's what keeps them going in the LARPing community. They also told me that they developed a lot of social insights, and this is what I call a safe place. Because once they entered these communities, they felt that they had nothing to lose. It was inclusive, it was welcoming, and it's all based on pretense. So if you fail socially in a LARP, it's actually not you failing, it's the character you're playing. And the other people, they would respond as if your character was crazy, but they would not think that you are crazy because you're just pretending. And that makes LARPing a brave space where they eventually started experimenting with social interaction. And they also told me that the learning that developed in LARPs then transferred into their daily lives. Some of them used these alibis, like the characters thinking, what would my character have done? And that made them braver. And they also told me that they got better at interpreting social nuances and dared be more straightforward about their needs. Because in LARP, you actually practice telling people, what do you want, what is okay, what is not okay, and you always have the consent-based play, right? So I argue in this article that the safe place makes it also a brave space, and it is in this brave space that the social learning happens. And I will give you a case which I think is quite powerful. My youngest participant, Luna, she was only 18 years old. The participants were between 18 and 60 years old. She was extremely shy and had no friends, and her mother talked her into joining a LARPing camp for youths. And after LARPing for a year, she realized that this is actually a safe place where I can start experimenting. She developed a really brave character because players, they write their own characters. Now I'm going to play a very brave character who's quite good socially. I will dare speaking to people. I will dare making my voice heard. I won't be afraid of conflicts. And that was like the opposite of me, or at least before those LARPs. And then she surprised herself by actually asking for a leadership position in the group. If I'm to live up to everything I wrote about my character and all her goals, then she'd ask now. And I know how disappointed she would be if I didn't ask. And it's fantastic. I could suddenly do things that I never thought I would be able to do. And then this also bleeds, this is the LARPing terminology, it bleeds into her daily life. After the latest LARP, when I became a leader, I returned back home with a lot of self-confidence. Even when I wasn't in character and was in school, I had so much more confidence. I dared speaking more to people, and it just stayed that way. And I felt so good because I was so proud of everything I had dared to do. So this is how LARPing can actually transform people's lives. So what happened if you consider the school aversion that I first talked about, and then you consider how autistic people thrive in imagination-based contents? What if you take imagination-based role play into schools? Could that increase the social confidence of the pupils? Could that contribute to social learning? And could that make school a place where there's also fun? If the Swedish Research Council is watching this and they wonder what I spent my funding doing, I was goofing around for 3 years in silly costumes, playing with kids. The postdoc project is also conducted in collaboration with the Swedish Live Verkstan, or the LARPing workshop. So I have some really skilled LARPing pedagogues by my side. They've been doing educational live action role play for 10 to 15 years in various schools all over Sweden. So our aims and hopes were to observe changes in social interaction, and the LARPing workshop specifically focused on adapting LARPs to autistic needs. So they actually put a lot of effort into learning about autism and also like trying to develop their methods all the time to fit these autistic kids that we met. And we also wanted to encourage agency and participation among the pupils through imagination-based activities that I will tell you more about soon. So as you can see here, it's practice-based, which means that we work down on the floor and we change things over time, depending on what works or what needs to be changed. The LARPing workshop worked with the ideas and the design. I did some participatory observation, and then we have pedagogues in the 2 different schools where we sort of ran the project, the middle school pedagogues and the secondary school pedagogues. And we had continuous discussions after each intervention on how to do things better. Then we also had the pupils giving us feedback. I tried to interview the pupils in a pilot project, and that didn't work at all. And I don't think this is about autism. It's just that teenagers are really disinterested in talking about what they learn in school, which some of you might have noticed at home. So I developed a silent debriefing. After each LARP, I gave them 3 post-it notes each, and they were to write something that was good or fun, something that was difficult. Sometimes I asked them to write down something new that they had done for the first time. And then also sometimes I asked them to give us advice on what to improve or what to think about for the next time. So here are examples of what they told us. So it's a mix of like, so the difficult stuff, for instance, some pupils responded that it was really hard being in the room at all. Some pupils said it was so hard to finish because it was so much fun and I didn't want to quit. So we got all like the range of reactions depending on the individuals that took part. I'm going to describe more in detail what we did later, but as you see then, we had 20 pupils in middle school between 8 and 12 years old, and then we had 18 pupils between 13 and 16 years old in the secondary school. The schools are very different, which was also challenging, and you know in secondary school the pupils get grades, which makes it quite different from a school where no one gets any grades, basically. What's important in middle school is Charlie's creative workshop. Charlie was originally one of the LARPing pedagogues at the LARPing workshop, but he got hired by this school a few hours a week where he has a workshop where people or the pupils can get scheduled, and especially pupils who suffer from school aversion. They might not want to go to school, but 1 hour a week they can at least go to Charlie's creative workshop, and then they can stay there and do whatever they want. And that has made a big difference when it comes to getting the kids to come back to school. So in the beginning of the project we tried out various LARPs, and in LARPing there are also different genres, and we've tried some that are more realistic, some that are more fantasy-based, and so on. And here are my fantastic LARPing pedagogue colleagues in these pictures. But what we realized doing these LARPs was that some of the kids were not that eager to participate. Some of them just jumped straight in, they knew immediately what to do, and they got totally absorbed. And then there were those who were more hesitant. And since we noticed that Charlie's creative workshop worked so well, we decided to also include other elements in the project that was more about creating stuff. So we got them involved in co-creation of LARPs. So we had workshops where they could go and they could create worlds, they could create characters, props, plots. Some like to work with sort of political ideologies and conflicts, and others were interested in religions and rituals. And as you can see, the material dimension is really important here to get their imagination going. So the LARPing workshop, they always arrive with this big van full of stuff, and it's easier to develop a character once you actually have the stuff in front of you and you get to try the clothes on, and suddenly you have this silly walk, or we also arrange catwalks for them to actually, you know, manifest a character like, okay, I'm a military, and then they'd start walking and people would applaud and cheer each other on. My colleague Eric developed this into a map of a whole world. So this map is what the pupils created. The red dots are conflict lines. There's a lot of conflicts in this world, especially the people of the corn religion and the people of the Apple Valley. They are in terrible conflicts with each other, and they also have different religions. You also have the magical butterfly forest, you have dinosaurs over there, Mountain Hill, and the calm mystical forest. So we used this world that they built together to also develop other stories, because now we had a narrative frame that we could operate within. For instance, the pupils were invited to an alchemic lab session where they got to create magical potions, and they also got to describe what function these potions would have in this magical world, like what effect would they have, how would you use it, who should avoid it, and so on. And this was a total success. And it's also fun in this project because we saw so many new things in these pupils. So many autistic individuals, they don't like having a mess, and they don't like getting sticky hands, but the pupils were crazy, and they were just making a mess and just all this disgusting smelly goo and playing around with it, and they really enjoyed it and talked a lot about it afterwards. And then we have Charlie's workshop, where the pupils in middle school could go and also create magical animals. Again, it starts with the material dimension. You create something and then you develop a narrative about what it is. So you can see that they are creating all sorts of things, and there's no limit. They're just free to use their imagination, and it can't go wrong, basically. And now I will tell you a very sweet discovery that I made a month ago. We were doing a LARP with young pupils. They were between 8 and 10 years old. They were actually in the same school as the middle school, but they were younger. And when I arrived at the classroom, this girl came up to me and she said, "Who are you? What are you doing?" And I said that I'm an autism researcher and I'm here to learn about autism and imagination from you and from your pedagogues. And then she said, "Well, I have devil guinea pigs." I'm like, "Okay, you have devil guinea pigs." "Yeah, they're very, very aggressive." And then she took me by the hand and she showed me to her desk. This is what it looks like in the classrooms. So this was her desk and the cupboard next to her. And then she had me climb under. She took out the chair and we climbed under here. And what she had down there was a magical world that she had developed in Charlie's workshop with magical animals. These were her very devilish guinea pigs. And then she also told me, "You know, my friend at this desk, he also has animals." And then we went to his desk and he had a similar little hidden universe down below. And then they told me the story about how his frogs would sometimes come and make a mess among her guinea pigs. But they were so aggressive, so they would chase them back. So they came once a month and then they would return and never come back again until a month later. And then she had also written this story. "A devil guinea pig is an animal with explosive temper. The boy is red and the girls have different colors. The boys are a little fragile and the girls are hard and they have venomous spit. They sneak, knock stuff over and ruin things. They need a lot of stimuli." And I think I can imagine where this story comes from and who it actually is about. And she told me that when she gets overstimulated, she sort of sneaks down there below and the teachers can't see her and she enters her magical little universe down below. So this is something she uses for support in school. It was also apparent that the kids had a lot of humor, and forbidden pleasures were extremely attractive to them. Trying out guns and weapons and swords and making a mess with these magical potions. And you can also see here with the magical potions, they have acid from the Kentucky Fried Chicken deep fryer. And this evil cheese boss has also appeared in different LARPs as someone to be defeated and conquered. So these are intended to give you an overview of actually what we have done over these 3 years with the pupils. But what was challenging for me was that I didn't know what happened in between these different activities. So I interviewed the teachers at both schools to get their point of view of how this actually has affected the pupils and the school culture in general. And one topic that kept reoccurring was that they use humor as a relational tool also in these activities. Ingrid said, "I would say that at least at this school, I've worked here for quite a few years now, that it's almost like a fairly pronounced method. With humor you can get very far. Structure, absolutely. But it's very clear that some kind of discipline and authority is not what you go for. It's like relationships and humor. That's how it works." That's how they work with these autistic pupils. When it comes to autism, it's very much ingrained that there should be preparation and structure and follow frameworks and so on. And there are certainly those pupils who think that it gets a little too messy when unexpected things happen, or that it takes some time to process and understand what's happening or so. But that's where I really think the humor comes in, that you can show clearly with your voice and body language then. Let's play. John in the other school said, I think humor is an incredibly important quality for building relationships with our pupils here at the school. To have the courage to invite them in, well, so that they see that I'm not this rigid teacher. I'm thinking that it's not only about the humor we use towards the pupils, but it's also among the colleagues, which the pupils get to see and hear. We talk a lot about how we have to keep our sense of humor. It's incredibly important for everyone. And Charlie told me this. We have a pupil whose thing is to steal keys. She's a thief and that's her thing. And you're like, yeah, absolutely. And then she steals your stuff. But you also know that you will always get them back when you tell her that now it's for real. Because she has learned those rules anyway. And that's really what LARP and roleplay becomes an extreme version of. That we can bring it all the way out there to that which is forbidden. I mean, you can't kill people, you can't be the bad guy. But here we can. And we'll be like adults who go, yeah, we join in, defeat the monster. So he also says that this is a way actually to learn social interaction, is to push the boundaries into the forbidden and then reversing and coming back to reality. They also talked about pupils who blossom. This is a word they kept coming back to. Alfred said, I think there were pupils who really stood out at the LARP compared to how they were in regular lessons, where they were very withdrawn. And they blossomed enormously when it was a LARP and you got to see something completely different. I'm thinking of M in the 8th grade, where he was drawn in and you could see this theater monkey in him. So that's an example of a huge difference between how he was in class and how he blossomed in play. In class, he often sits in his seat and doesn't say very much. He stays quite quiet and is kind of enclosed in his own space. He answers when you ask him questions, but it was completely different in the LARP. How he blossomed and communicated and so on. I think there was a huge difference. It was fantastic to see. So you see these individual cases where some of the pupils have really changed their way of being. And that what's interesting is that also this changes the way the teachers see them, because suddenly they see new sides of the pupils, which also changes their relationships. Maria says, I'm new at this school, so I've only seen them mainly in class, and I saw completely different aspects of the pupils in the LARP. I participated in the LARP in February, and I got to see pupils who I absolutely did not expect. For instance, this girl in 9th grade who became a completely different girl. That was fantastic. I have her in this subject and she's very quiet, a bit like Jay says, lessons tend to become a bit squared. But in the LARP, she was the one who took command and encouraged the others. And it was great fun. Seeing her flourish is so fantastic. And then also talked about how the kids are learning social codes. I'd say that I still think you can see that it differs to some extent from groups with neurotypical children, and that is children without autism. It is still, or in many moments, I feel that it can be that they are quite inside their own experience of it, and that you as an adult need to work quite a lot to ensure that you just need to be present anyway. Now this kid is talking, now we have to listen to them. Wait a minute, that's a great idea you've got, but wait a minute with it. Because this turn-taking thing is difficult. You get pretty caught up in all the ideas, you get yourself, and then it's hard to think, well, they probably have lots of ideas that they want to tell you about, so we really have to sort that out. And this little guy has to be involved and say something too. Because some kids may get lost in the crowd, and then there are those who have 40 scenarios that they want to talk about. So it's definitely co-creation, but as an educator, you still have to be involved and help with that quite a lot. So the pedagogues have to go in and do some scaffolding, because you have these overly eager pupils and then you have those who are more quiet. So the educators have to go in and kind of balance the space they take. And Charlie adds, And there's always this child who takes command in a positive way. I mean, who actually notices things and says, now you've done it, now it's actually this person's turn to do it. So they do practice turn taking in these activities. I'd say in the classrooms, they're more like sitting one by one doing their individual thing, but this is like real interaction where you have to think about taking turns. I think I'm gonna skip to this slide. Fiona had a really good point about some pupils who get uncomfortable, because that worried me a little at times. I could see some pupils who were sort of standing by the wall and they looked really, really uncomfortable. And I was wondering, like, is it really okay that they are here? Because the participation was voluntary. No one forced them to go there. Not all pupils in these schools were involved, but they chose it themselves. But then Fiona said, I mean, many of them are out on deep water. This is something they don't know. It's not fully prepared. You can't know how it will end. Then I think it's good that things in LARPs are not too prepared. It is so good for our pupils to experience organized chaos. I mean, even if there is still some choice in this chaos, like what is expected of me, what is my role. Like with this girl, it's so good to be exposed to this organized chaos because so many other things are routinized. There are regular meetings at the psychologist. Some have taxis to pick them up and drop them off at certain times. There are medications to be taken at certain times. There is very little freedom or kind of chaos that is created. And then there can of course be chaos since they can't always piece things together in their everyday life. But there is a sense of security in LARP. There is a kind of structure, but we cannot prepare them for what will happen in the end. What will happen during the LARP? What will we encounter? What will we be exposed to? What we will look like? Because we don't know, and I think that is great. That also says something about how well these pedagogues know their pupils. And they talked a lot about, like, so this pupil, now when I've seen her in LARP, I actually know that I can push her a little bit more. I can expose her to a certain degree of discomfort. And then eventually she conquers that, and then you can push her a little bit more. But then they could also identify pupils like, no, this kid can't join. It's too much for him or for her. So to summarize these findings really briefly, and again, using this model of the safe and brave space for social learning, I think that humor, playfulness, and the various choices that these pupils had makes it a safe space. Because some of them stopped going to the LARPs and only stayed in the creative workshops, and they always got to choose where to go and how to join and how active to be. And some of them were simply observers. They didn't participate at all, but they were in the room, and that was a good challenge for them. And in the brave space, they challenged themselves by meeting new people, and they also have an agency. They can choose how to act or what to create. And the social learning, I think, happens is that it's okay to lose control in a safe space. You practice taking turns, you practice collaboration, and you also get to unmask. Because autistic people mask their autistic traits a lot, especially girls. They pretend not to be autistic, and they suffer a lot from that. It's extremely exhausting. And I will argue that humor and playfulness redirects the sense of fear. It's hard to be scared and laugh at the same time. It somehow redirects the attention from what if I fail to how can I have fun. I also think that it's extremely important for learning to dare make mistakes, to go beyond the boundary of where you are safe, because learning happens really efficiently from mistakes. And I would also argue that in comparison to reading fantasy literature or just playing computer games, LARPing takes the embodied aspect one step further, because you get input on all cognitive levels, from top down to bottom up. And I'm also convinced that to learn about interaction, you have to engage in interaction. It's a bit like playing the piano. You can only get so far by reading about how to play the piano or someone telling you how to play the piano, but you still won't be a professional pianist unless you actually sit down and practice. Sager and Shamov, they comment that copying others doesn't happen really efficiently in autism. Whereas most people develop social competence through experiencing everyday interaction, individuals with autism are often unable to absorb this kind of knowledge without the benefit of direct skill instruction. It's not enough to stand next to people and experience them interacting, right? You have to be actively involved in it. And Chia writes, given that social interaction is an important source of the sensomotor experience, then the later is necessary for the configuration of the human mirror system. So the brain reacts to what your body does. I only have a couple of slides left. And I'd like to talk for a couple of minutes about the narrative scaffolding that I think believes in these narrative nerd culture realms that autistic people are attracted to. So Sean Gallagher, he argues that to really understand someone, we need communicative and narrative competency. That means that we don't experience things as they are. We experience them through the lens of an idea or a narrative of what we think is going on. So interpretation depends on the perceived situation. So what is the story behind a certain behavior? Say if Christine would suddenly burst out in tears in front of us. I wouldn't know how to react to her tears unless I know why she's crying, right? I need a story. And maybe you got some terrible news about an accident that happened to your family, and then I would definitely comfort you. Or maybe you started crying because of some really banal reason and just think that that's silly, why are you crying, right? But I need a story to understand the tears or the laughter or the anger. And I think that this is what you get in LARPing, for instance, because you have a story, you have costumes, you have props, and then it becomes easier to know how to navigate socially. So, for instance, if Sarah would attack me in this LARP, I would understand that she's attacking me because there's a story about a conflict in this LARP, right? And then there's a story about my character, which would guide how I would react to your attack. Would I run away or would I attack you back, right? And I also think that humor is a narrative device. It also makes up a sort of narrative scaffolding. Just like Ingrid said, it's like, yeah, come on, let's play. And you show it with your intonation, you show it with your body. Now we're having fun. That's also a kind of narrative, I argue. Something I spent much time thinking about is also what it means to actually participate. So as I said before, we had some kids who were just sitting by the side, not doing very much. And I actually identified three groups. The front runners who just immerse into play and they know exactly what to do and they are really talkative and really extrovert and they just start playing. And then you have the largest group, I call them the participators. They are more hesitant, they kind of walk around and observe, but they are still involved. And then you have those who are solely observers. But I think I also realized that this depends on their various starting points. For some pupils, it's a really high level of participation to actually step into the room and be there during the LARP. Because first I felt like, oh, they're missing out on the whole thing. How are we going to reach them? But I realized over time that we are actually reaching them. And after the LARPs, when these kids are joking and laughing in the corridors, the observers were there. They're part of the narrative because they know what it's about and they're not left out. And I think this relates really well to what Vygotsky calls the zone of proximal development. You have different starting points and then you scaffold so everyone climbs in their own pace. towards new challenges. So the final slide, I argue that it's not so much what we did, not the specific activities, but it's first how we did it. It was voluntary, it was participatory, playful, fun, and there were various options for participating. I also think it was important when we did it, that we didn't only do it once or twice, but we've done it regularly over at least a couple of years in both schools. And also, this is actually what we need to dig into now. Who did it? It needs to be the right persons running these sorts of projects. We also saw some pedagogues who were quite hesitant towards playing. So not unlike some autistic pupils, teachers also seem to prefer structure and predictability, and some of them feel really, really silly putting on a costume and playing with the kids, while for others it comes naturally. So I think this is where we need to put our effort now and see how we can engage pedagogues in various ways, also depending on their different starting points. Pedagogues are also different. Thank you very much.